Lionel Richie canceled his concert in Chicago tonight at the United Center after an onstage health scare during Wednesday night's show in Minnesota.
Now we're hearing from fans who are worried about the Grammy winner's health.
For most of his life, Lionel Richie has been the picture of consistency. Same warmth on stage, same steady voice, same easy charm whether he's performing to 10,000 people or sitting behind the judge's table on national television. That's part of why what happened on a June night in Minnesota hit so many fans so hard. The man who has spent 5 decades making everything look effortless suddenly looked human. And it happened in front of a packed arena with nowhere to hide. To understand why this moment feels so significant, it helps to remember just how long Richie has been doing this. He was born in 1949 in Tuskegee, Alabama, and grew up on the campus of the Tuskegee Institute in a household where music wasn't a hobby. It was practically the family language. His grandmother taught classical piano, his uncle played jazz, and by the time young Lionel arrived at Tuskegee as a student on a tennis scholarship, he'd already been steeped in more musical tradition than most professionals ever absorb in a lifetime. He wasn't even planning on a music career at first. Divinity studies were on the table before a college band changed the entire trajectory of his life. That band, of course, became the Commodores, and Richie's path from background saxophone player to the group's defining voice wasn't quick or guaranteed. It took years of grinding through the Motown machine before the group's songwriting needs pushed him toward the microphone. Once that shift happened, though, it happened for good. The Commodores gave the world Brick House, Easy, and 3 Times a Lady. And by the time Richie stepped out as a solo artist in the early 80s, he was already a proven commodity. Nothing quite prepared the industry for what came next. His 1983 album Can't Slow Down sold more than 20 million copies worldwide, powered by songs like All Night Long, Hello, and Endless Love, that turned him into one of the most recognizable voices in American music. He co-wrote We Are the World alongside Michael Jackson, a charity single that raised more than $63 million for famine relief. Money Richie never took a cut of himself. Decades later, his songwriting catalog, including hits he wrote for other artists, is still generating revenue. One of the quieter but sturdier pillars of a financial picture that most estimates now put somewhere around $200 million. A lot of that fortune isn't just old money sitting in a bank account either. Richie has stayed remarkably active. Between his ongoing seat as a judge on American Idol, reportedly worth close to $10 million a year, and a touring schedule that has kept him in front of live audiences well into his 70s, he's built a career that simply refuses to slow down, which is fitting, given the title of his most famous song. So when his new tour with Earth, Wind and Fire was announced for the summer of 2026, nobody expected anything other than another victory lap for a living legend. That tour, billed as Sing a Song All Night Long, kicked off on June 24th at the Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul, Minnesota, in front of roughly 10,000 fans. It had been in the works since January, a 26-date run designed to hit major markets across the country before wrapping up in Austin in mid-August. Demand had been strong enough in several cities that promoters opened up additional seating in the weeks leading up to opening night. Richie himself had posted a message thanking his band and crew for their preparation, giving absolutely no hint that anything was off. For the first chunk of the show, everything unfolded exactly as expected. Richie moved through his catalog with the crowd fully locked in. Then, about 55 minutes into the performance, during Dancing on the Ceiling, a song that's normally built around him moving across the stage with real physical energy, he sat down. He told the audience he was feeling dizzy. That alone was enough to make longtime fans in the crowd go quiet, because this wasn't a song where sitting down is part of the choreography. He stayed seated through 3 Times a Lady as well before walking backstage, and the crowd assumed it was a short break. It wasn't. About 40 minutes later, his saxophonist came back out to deliver the news directly. Richie wasn't well enough to return. The rest of the show was off. Paramedics had already met him backstage, and he was taken by ambulance to a hospital as what was described at the time as a precaution rather than confirmation of anything serious. The clearest public explanation came not from Richie's team, but from Earth, Wind and Fire drummer John Paris, who told a local paper that Richie had simply been a little dehydrated. That's it. No official statement from Richie's camp or from Live Nation has expanded on that explanation, which has left a noticeable gap that fans have been trying to fill ever since with whatever grainy phone footage and second-hand details they can find. What makes the whole thing feel more jarring is the timing. Just weeks before St. Paul, in May, Richie had played a high-energy show at the opening of the Acrisure Amphitheater in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and by all accounts he looked as sharp and energized as ever. There was no warning sign, no gradual decline anyone could point to. One month he's commanding a stage with his usual stamina. The next he's sitting through two of his own signature songs because his body wouldn't let him do anything else. This isn't the first time Richie's health has collided with his career in a very public way. Back in the 90s, at the peak of his fame, something started going wrong with his voice. It took 4 separate surgeries and a long stretch of uncertainty before doctors finally traced the issue to acid reflux triggered by his diet. Richie has said in interviews since that he genuinely believed his career might be over during that period, because a singer who can't trust his own voice doesn't have much left to stand on, no matter how deep his back catalog runs. He recovered fully, but that scare reportedly changed how seriously he's treated things like hydration and vocal rest on tour ever since, which makes the dehydration explanation this time around land with a bit more weight than it might for another artist. Then there's the more recent, more personal disclosure. In his 2025 memoir, Richie opened up publicly for the first time about being diagnosed with ADHD, describing a childhood where he couldn't sit still and often felt overwhelmed by what he called sensory overload, struggles that simply didn't have a name or any real support system back when he was growing up in Alabama. It was a surprising admission from a performer whose public image has always leaned so heavily on polish and control, and it added a layer of vulnerability that a lot of longtime fans hadn't seen from him before. None of these past health chapters are confirmed to be directly connected to what happened on stage in St. Paul, but taken together, they paint a picture of someone who has quietly weathered more behind the scenes than his television persona ever lets on. What's remarkable is how rarely any of it has actually stopped him from working. He toured consistently through his 60s and 70s, and his run on American Idol since 2018 has kept him in front of audiences almost every week without any real interruption. That track record is exactly why this sudden pause feels like such a departure from the norm, rather than something fans were quietly bracing for. The fallout from that St. Paul show came fast. Live Nation announced that the next 2 dates, June 26th in Chicago and June 27th in Columbus, were being postponed on doctor's orders so Richie could rest before returning to the stage. The official word described him as heartbroken about the cancellations, and the plan was for the tour to pick back up on June 30th in Pittsburgh, just a few days later. That short turnaround suggests his medical team is treating this as a temporary setback rather than something requiring a longer break, though nobody has laid out publicly what benchmarks need to be hit before he's cleared to perform again. As of now, no rescheduled dates have been announced for the 2 shows that were skipped, leaving ticket holders in Chicago and Columbus waiting on updates. The rest of the 26-date run is still expected to proceed as planned, all the way through the August finale in Austin, which matters, because a full cancellation would have raised a much scarier set of questions. Instead, this is being framed as a pause, not an ending. Whether Richie needs to adjust his pacing, build in more rest days, or scale back the physical demands of the show as the tour continues is still an open question that only time and his medical team can really answer. Beyond the logistics of rescheduled shows, this moment has reopened a bigger conversation about what it actually takes for performers in their late 70s to keep meeting the physical demands of arena touring night after night. Richie has built a huge part of his later career identity around exactly that kind of stamina, positioning himself as a legacy artist who never slowed down while a lot of his peers from the same era scaled back or stopped touring entirely. That's part of what made committing to a full 26-city run feel so notable in the first place. And it's exactly why this health scare is being watched so closely by an industry curious whether that pace is still sustainable for an artist his age. Richie's team hasn't released a more detailed account of what triggered the dizziness beyond the informal dehydration explanation, and it's still unclear whether any further testing happened during that brief hospital visit. What is clear is how the fans have responded. Footage from the show spread quickly online, and the reaction has been a mix of genuine concern and relief. Relief that he seemed to be in good spirits, even while clearly struggling in the moment. Messages of support have been flooding in alongside all the speculation. There's something almost symbolic about an artist who has spent decades presenting himself as untouched by time being forced in front of 10,000 people to confront the same physical limits everyone eventually runs into. How this whole chapter gets remembered depends a lot on what happens next. If Richie walks out on stage in Pittsburgh and picks up right where he left off, this becomes a brief scare, a rough night quickly put behind him. If more health updates start trickling out in the coming weeks, it starts to look like something more significant. Maybe the first visible sign that his body can't quite keep up with the pace he's set for himself his entire career. For now, nothing is finished. Richie is expected back in front of audiences within days. Doctors have reportedly cleared a path toward recovery, and the tour itself hasn't been canceled. But the image of him sitting through Dancing on the Ceiling, a song that's supposed to be about movement and energy, is already one of the more striking moments of his career this late in the game. It's a reminder that even the most reliable legends in the business aren't immune to the occasional night that doesn't go according to plan. Whether Pittsburgh brings a clean return to form or another uneasy moment remains to be seen. But for millions of fans who've followed Lionel Richie since the Commodore's days, this is one storyline they'll be watching very closely. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.